Welcome to the Building Life Through Sport Network podcast. We're recording today from Centennial Plaza, Jerseys in Canton, Ohio. And today we have a great guest, and I'm so excited that we have Thom McDaniels here with us. He's a former coach here in Canton, Ohio, and other places. And we're going to get to know him just a little bit better. Hi, how are you, Coach McD? You're not going to ever be that other name.
I understand that. No, I'm great. I'm wonderful, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here with us because this is a very important podcast because we want to capture what it means to be in the journey versus the destination for when you are setting your goals and whatever have you. And in particular, in my reading, and I know you're an avid reader, have you ever read Dr. King's Strength to Love?
No, I haven't.
You have to get that. It's the only compilation of his sermons.
Oh.
And they put it all together in one book. And in there, he mentions something, and I don't know the direct quote, but he mentions that oftentimes we mix up the means to the outcome. In our journey, we settle and work through everything as though we're in the outcome and not necessarily traveling and accomplishing the means to get to the outcome. Now, he spoke about peace. So, when it's necessary to have peace, it matters how you get peace.
Sure.
You don't just say, okay, we're going to have peace at the end of this.
Yeah.
It matters how it's accomplished. But it's just the mixing up the means. And so today, that's why we want to talk about the journey, and specifically your journey.
Okay.
I know a lot of people are looking forward to hearing about football, but we're not going to talk about sports today.
No,
not
we're not
at all.
No.
We're just going to talk about you. So I understand in the past few months that you for the holidays, and this is normal for you.
Correct.
The holidays, you travel a lot.
Yes.
And to be able to see your children.
Right.
So most people just know about Ben and Josh, but you have another son.
Yep. Jason,
and he is local though, right?
Yes, Jason is local. And so Jason is here. My daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, is here. And my oldest grandson, Ethan, is here. He's a student at Walsh.
Okay. So they're local, so you get a chance when you're home to spend time with them. But Josh and Ben, they're not. And so during the holidays, you have to do this little hopscotch thing.
Yes.
In order to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So, you have good trips.
Yes.
Yes. But you stay a little busy when you get there.
Yes.
What's that like?
Well, we have 7 other grandchildren who unfortunately live apart from us, and they'll never live in Canton. And, currently Ben is in Houston and Josh is in New England. But in order to see the 7 kids, especially during the season, we have to go to them. And that's a good thing because, we get to see grandkids and daughters-in-law and sons, but we get to see some football along with it. So it's a positive on top of a positive. But when we're there, my daughter-in-law, Laura, that's Josh's wife, she's got 4 kids, age 17, to 9. And they're all engaged and involved in a lot of activities. And so I become the temporary chauffeur, that takes them to dance, or takes them to gymnastics, takes them to ice skating, or takes Jack to lifting. And it eases the burden for my daughter-in-law because she's shuffling 4 kids, sometimes at the same time, and almost always in different directions. So I busy myself, replacing her in that particular role, giving her a little bit of a reprieve. But it's all good because we want our kids to be involved in things.
Right.
And they're involved in multiple, often at the same time.
So basically, that's where I always say when I go visit my children, and they have their children, my grands, they switch back into child mode and we switch into parent mode. They switch on us.
Yeah, that's an instant transition.
As soon as you hit the door.
As soon as you hit the door.
They ask for the meals to be prepped. They ask for the chauffeuring. Yes, they always do that. So let's go talk about you. Did you play sports as a youth?
I did. I grew up in Orrville, Ohio. And it was a great little small town environment for me to grow up in. And back at that time, and we're talking the 50s and the 60s, they didn't have a youth football program. We had youth basketball, we had youth baseball, and I did both, and loved that. Loved engaging with other kids. At that particular time, there were 3 elementary schools, neighborhood schools in Orville, and so I knew all the kids at Maple Street, but I got to know the kids at Oak and Walnut Street School, and was exposed as a player to different adults who function as coaches, and I have great memories, and I believe that the spark that lit my coaching fire happened back during that time as a kid, because I had some very impressionable, very remarkable people who were great role models for me as not just grown-ups, but as adults.
So I'm here. Did you ever play football?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Once we got to junior high, they had middle school football and high school football.
Oh, okay.
So I started the football part of my athletic experience, in middle school. It was always my favorite sport. And I was just a guy as an athlete, but that didn't diminish my love for the sport. But yeah, I played junior high and high school football.
Yeah, so we go back because, during my PhD studies and that dissertation, and I pulled the NFL Coach of the Year award recipients, and you were my, not guinea pig, but guinea pig, because you actually, I would sound off with you everything I was going to ask the actual NFL Coach of the Year award recipients, because you yourself were nominated and you went far in that process.
Yeah. Twice. I was nominated by Michael Dawson, Kenny Peterson here, and then I was nominated by Mario Manningham when I went to Warren. And I was a finalist for the award, which is significant.
Correct.
And wasn't disappointed that I wasn't the guy. But what that did for me is that spoke more to me about the relationship that I had with the kids, that they would think enough of me to do that.
Exactly.
In 2 different communities. But
yes. And so you definitely were a great service to me when I wanted to try to figure out that part of my journey.
Sure.
Trying to get finished with that. So what in itself, you mentioned the relationship you have with coaches while you were growing up, but what made you say, you know what, this is for me? Did you make that decision in high school? Was it in college? Was it after college? When did you make that decision?
About being a coach? Early in my college experience. English was easy for me. I knew punctuation, but couldn't tell you why it was right. I could spell, but couldn't tell you how I knew to spell. But that was easy for me. So I majored in English, had every intention of being a teacher and a coach. So I knew that coming out of high school. One of my classmates, we graduated together, but we coached youth baseball. And so that was my very first taste of it. And I did that because of the impression that my youth coaches had on me. I wanted to do what they did for me. I wanted to do that for other kids. And so the first year of that experience, and you understand how some of these youth league drafts go. Well, it was a 12 to 14-year-old league, and we had like all 12-year-olds.
Okay.
But okay, we were fine with that. We made it to the championship game, just a little local thing in Orville, Ohio, the first year, but didn't win, and then we won it and went undefeated the second year. But that was those coaches I had as youth lit the fire, and then these guys just ignited it a little bit more. So I knew I wanted to coach when I went to college.
Okay, so I want to know, coaching, which came first? Were you already a coach before you married, or did you marry and then launch your coaching career?
I started coaching and teaching in 1972 when I was not married.
Okay.
And marriage came at some point after that, obviously. And that's a perspective about the coaching profession and the coaching experience. Let me just tell you, I think it takes a special woman
I was going to say, did she know she was marrying a coach?
She had 3 brothers, and she was a cheerleader, and she was a jock. She was an athlete, so she related to
sports
to the extent that she understood what coaching meant to me, and she made the transition very easily.
Okay, so she understood this coach thing.
She did, and again, being an assistant coach's wife is not the same as being the head coach's wife. So there were transitions along the way. Yeah, I was an assistant in Orville, assistant in Mansfield-Madison, an assistant Canton McKinley before.
So that's different for her.
Oh, certainly it is, because the demands are less. Any criticism is directed at the head football coach. It isn't, the assistant coach, generally speaking. The responsibilities. Sure.
Speaking of that criticism, I'm going to have to tell you, when Bookto played Warren, I can't remember the year, so I would have sat, for some reason I was in the stands. I have no idea why I wasn't on the sideline, but I was in the stands, and your wife, Chris, sat behind me. And I just thought that was so odd. And do you know why she sat on the visitor side?
Yeah, because she avoided people. And we learned that here in Canton. The coaches' wives had reserved seats, if I can say it that way. And there were, home crowds sat on both sides of Fawcett Stadium.
Yes.
Some people wanted to be behind the team, but some people wanted to be. But they were on the other side. They were on what we would consider the visitor side. But there were people who were McKinley fans who, were critical for whatever reason, and they knew that the wives were there. They knew who they were, and their criticism during games was loud enough and unkind enough to provoke them. And so Chris, back in the day, she went and sat by herself above the old locker room so that she didn't have to subject herself to criticism about me or what we were doing or a play we called or a decision that we made during the course of the game. And so she learned, if I can avoid that while the game was going on, then that's less stress, less tension for me. So that's why she did that.
Yes, I remember that. So let's talk about, we talked about when you go to visit your grandchildren and you become that parent, even though they're grandchildren, you still become the parent role. Let's talk about your parenting and your coaching styles.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that how you parent is reflective in your coaching style that you gave to your athletes when you were coaching?
I would say that it's as close to 100% identical as it can be.
So you weren't Superman, like you didn't come out of the phone booth, the Superman suit, and be this other person that came out there.
No. I coached other people's children before I ever got to coach my own. I was their father and functioned in that role until they got to the point where they were of age to play for me. But I had coached other kids, my whole coaching life until the 80s when 90s when they played for me. But I approached coaching in the discipline that I required in coaching athletes was the same discipline that I applied at home. It was something that we did for them. It was not something that we did to them. Yeah. And so that was consistent for me. And I think that the kids that played for me, they didn't see me as a father, but if they played and were teammates of my kids, I think that they would tell you that he was harder on Ben and Josh than he was on us, but the expectations were the same. Yeah. So I didn't see it as two distinctly different roles. I saw them as very similar roles with just the tiniest bit of difference.
I know, because you have a long-time role in my life. You were a teacher for me.
Yeah.
Then you were coach for my children's father.
Right.
You were position coach for them. And then for my one son, when he reached high school, you were coach for him.
Yep.
And then Sean went on to Brookville, so you didn't coach him, but you were coach across the field while he was there.
Sure.
And so like you just mentioned, so we go way back. So you just mentioned you were coaching these children prior to yours.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like coaching your children?
It was, it made something that I loved immensely already. It took it just to a little different level. And it was because they were my kids. And and your sons may remember when they were little, they were at practice.
Right.
So we hear all the time, from whether it's a Canton kid or a Warren kid, I mean, their whole life they wanted to be a Bulldog, or their whole life they wanted to be a Raider. Well, literally, my kids' whole life, they wanted to be a McKinley football player. And once they were 4 or 5 and could stay out of the way and not get in the way, then they were allowed to come to practice. And so they grew up. So now, now I'm coaching not somebody else's kids. I'm coaching my own kids.
So I know everyone believes that you gave them special attention because they were yours. Do you recall that?
Yeah, admittedly, I admit that I was overbearing and unreasonable with Josh in terms of the expectations. And that was me figuring out how to, be a parent coach for the first time. And by the time, he graduated, I learned that I needed to back off. I had assistant coaches, suggest that to me on more than one occasion. Hey man, back off a little bit. Don't be so over the top in my criticism of him if he made a mistake or whatever. And by his senior year, I had that figured out. And so I'm sure his senior year was more enjoyable than the previous 2. Back then we were a 3-year high school. And then when Ben came along, because I had finally figured it out with Josh, I don't think that I was unreasonable and overbearing. So there was a transition for me, but I was that unreasonable guy that didn't allow them any margin for error, and that's not reasonable. I shouldn't have done that, but I had to learn that by coaching Josh before I finally got it figured out,
right.
And I didn't do that with Ben.
We both have backgrounds. Mine is not as extensive as yours in that recruiting game because it is a game.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for a fact that I have gained scholarships for children that are not mine. How did you position your sons for the recruiting? When did you start that process to get them ready to be recruited? And did they go on full scholarship to college?
I did it the same way for them that I did for the kids who didn't belong to me, who weren't my sons. Back in the day, the colleges would send out recruiting cards via the mail, and they wanted you to identify just the names and contact information, perhaps height and weight, any academic information, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like obsessive compulsive about returning those. Okay. And I will tell you with every confidence that I was in the minority of coaches who faithfully returned those things. Because it was a matter of time to fill out the information and so on and so forth. And then basically they were self-addressed and pre-stamped, and then that was all that was required. But as they got into their junior year and demonstrated enough ability to want to play college football at some level, Josh was a D3 kid that went to John Carroll and had a great experience. Ben was a borderline D1 guy that ended up being scholarship at Kent State, and I think he was scholarship as much because of the success we had his junior and senior year when we were state national champs in '97 and state '98, and the fact that Dean Peete was a new head coach at Kent. He scholarshiped Rashawn Hall and DeMarlo Rozier and James Gamble and Matt Curry, a year ahead of Ben, and then he scholarshiped Benjamin too. And Ben had a great experience. He earned the starting position as a sophomore in the spring, and Josh Cribbs enrolled in that fall, and won the quarterback job as a freshman. And Ben couldn't compete with that because Josh Cribbs was extremely gifted. But they were just part of the process.
Part of the same process.
Yep, part of the same process. At that time, colleges were hosting one-day camps. Mm-hmm. And so we'd load them up in school vans, and we did everybody local. If Kent had one, we took them to Kent. We'd go to Bowling Green. We'd go to Toledo. We took them to Ohio State. Because at that point too, the college recruiters were not allowed to have contact with the kids unless they were on their campus. So we took them to the campuses.
Was there a cost for the one day? Was there a cost back then?
Yeah, but it was minimal.
Okay.
Say $20 a kid, and we asked the boosters of the Bulldog Athletic Association to cover the expense, the cost, of the one day camp. But it was affordable, and I'd get another coach or two to drive one of the other vans, and we'd take 12, 15 kids, for the day, and our program prepped them for everything that they did. Our kids had done a pro agility drill 100 or 150 times before they ever did it on a college campus. They knew, how to run a 40, how to execute a vertical jump and get a good. A good result.
Yeah, that brings me to a question. I was talking to my daughter, this morning, and she was doing the roster of signing up for camps for the spring and for the summer. She only has one. She has two children, but she only has one in camp right now. Mm-hmm. And she was like, "Mom, can you believe that you're charging this for cheerleading camp one day?
Yeah.
Do you believe that they're charging this for basketball camp?" So back then, the fees weren't high for the one day camps.
No.
They were reasonable. So, I know now, there's a lot going on with the training and specialized coaching and private coaching and all of that. Did your children, did they do any of that? Like, did you private coach them at home? Or, I don't know. Did you have off time as a head coach? I don't know to do that.
No, I turned my kids, and they went to Woodland, which is Schreiber now, I believe, and they played at Roosevelt with your kids on Saturday mornings. And Ernie Sheeler was the custodian at that school, and he was their basketball coach. I turned my kids over to people in this community: R.C. Hill, Lester Jones, but as a member of the Y.
Right. Because now everyone. I read an article. The parents are spending somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
On this readiness.
Right. We didn't need to do that back then. I don't remember if there was a fee for the youth football program here in Canton.
$35.
Yeah, but it was manageable. Yeah. It was manageable, and I don't think that private lessons and the pay to go to camp thing was big business like it is now. It was manageable and we could handle it. But I turned my kids over to the people who coach youth sports here in Canton.
So I'm sure it's a lot of people want to know. You have two sons out there in the sport world. How do you get them both from Fawcett Stadium to NFL stadiums? Not even just as, they never played pro football, correct?
Correct.
They're coaches at this pro level. How did that happen?
Well, let me backtrack just for a second, too. Coaching my sons was made easier because as grade school kids playing at Roosevelt or middle school kids playing junior high basketball or football, there were people who decided they were good enough to start and function. So as they were coming up, I wasn't the first coach that ever put him in the huddle for the first time. I wasn't the first coach to put him on the floor as a starter in basketball or around the field as a baseball player. So around Canton, I never got a lot of flack about their playing time. And it's because other people besides me decided they were good enough to play. So I just wanted to go back.
So they're good enough to play. That's what. So yeah. How did they get to this place?
Okay. Now to get to that question, they fell in love with football earlier than I did, and they knew early that they wanted to coach. And I can't point to the moment in my life when I figured this out, but it had to be in the early 90s when I encouraged them that if they wanted to coach, to get into college coaching and not necessarily high school coaching. And there was something that happened in education at that particular time, and I was a career English teacher that turned me, it required that I make that suggestion to them. So they go have college football experience. And good experiences, and they both wanted to coach. So at that time, what the path to college coaching was to be a graduate assistant at a university. And so, I'm Thom McDaniels, head coach at McKinley, and if you recruit Ohio, you're stopping at Canton McKinley, not because of me, because it's Canton McKinley. Correct. So I used every contact that I had, and I had, coast to coast. Right. Each of them got one offer to be a graduate assistant, and they only needed one. We didn't need to, post, this is my 10th offer, like it happens today. But Josh got an offer to be a graduate assistant for Nick Saban at Michigan State, and I knew Nick well, still do. And Ben got one offer, and that was to be a graduate assistant at Minnesota for Glenn Mason. Okay. And both guys had recruited my building, Absolutely. And I had long-standing relationships with them. And I remember taking them both, and I remember telling them this specifically. This is the last time that I'll be able to impact or influence your future. Correct. Because from now on, it's going to be Nick Saban who you have to impress. And I have no influence. Once you go work for Nick, Nick's the man with the influencer. Once you work for Glenn Mason, Glenn's the man with the influence. And so those are the people that you have to please, and your dad's going to become basically a spectator, ultimately a grandpa too. But Josh is at Michigan State working for Nick. Ben's in high school. Nick leaves Michigan State as the head coach and goes to LSU. Invited Josh to go with him, but Josh, I think, was a little reluctant at that particular time, to go from a Midwest kid, to living in the South. And so he didn't go. But a guy that he was a GA with Michigan State was an entry-level guy at the Patriots. Okay. Bill Belichick, and his name is Brian Dable, who's the offensive coordinator at Buffalo now, and is going to become a head coach probably in the league this year. But Bill Belichick asked Brian Dable, who's an entry-level guy? We need an entry-level guy. Do you know somebody? He says, yeah, I know a guy. What's his name? Josh McDaniels. We'll reach out.
And that's how it happens. Because, I remember in my traveling, I could have had a contingent. I believe I had a contingent from the Bahamas of coaches with me. And we attended a local coaches clinic up in Cleveland. And you were there. And
I remember that.
Before that workshop even started, it was time for that particular series. I can't remember who the speaker was. You were sitting on the front row.
Yes.
With your paper and pen. Mm-hmm. And some of my coaches went there and sat. And I believe I might have introduced you to them at the end. But at the end, I asked you, why, you've been coaching all these years. Mm-hmm. Why are you, first of all, early? You're the first one in the room with paper and pencil. Mm-hmm. Why were you up there like, this is my first time attending a coach clinic seminar? That's the way you were up there. You're like, I've never, and you probably heard the speaker a plethora of times. Mm-hmm. What makes you, at this, I don't even know how many years you have been coaching, still front row early, waiting for the seminar to start?
Because I'm a lifelong learner. It's one reason I read. And the other thing is that I absolutely loved the game. And I was silly enough to believe that if you loved the game would love you back. Okay, so loving the game for me meant to be early, be prepared, and sit up front.
The same lessons we teach.
It's the same message I gave the players when they went on to college.
Correct.
Don't sit in the back of the room. Get up in the front. And I always sat on the aisle.
Yes, you did. You were right on the aisle. I remember. So what you're saying, what you taught the players, you taught Josh and Ben, and they,
absolutely.
Once they decided this was my career, then I'm going to act this way in this career, and I'm always going to remain a student. So do they sit early? Do they do that?
Yeah. They've been bitten by that bug too. The other message they got as I took them off and returned to Canton was that if Nick Saban tells you to make coffee, you do it better than anybody's ever done it before. Yeah. If he tells you to go pick up a recruit at the airport, you do that better than it's ever been done before. Ben got the same message. But apparently they did well enough to make positive impressions on those two guys and others. And, they start their networking and so on and so forth. And that's how they ended up where they are.
Yeah. Well, I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Have you ever taken a coaching job that you knew didn't belong to you? And when you knew it wasn't yours, what did you do?
The only coaching job that I took where I had second thoughts about was when I came out of retirement to coach at McKinley in 2014. The previous head coach had left late in the school year. Adrian Allison was the superintendent. He's a former player of mine. And so it's late in the game to find a head football coach. So he reached out to me, and I'd been retired and I'd been out of coaching, and asked me to come back. Knowing that it wasn't going to be a long-term experience. But what I found, I had an indication that I was no longer prepared or capable to do what I had done the way I had done it. And it had something to do with the fact that every generation of kids is not identical. There are changes, mostly because the way that we parent and adults deal with children has changed. But that's when I knew that I can't do this job the way that I used to do it. And it's why I stayed 1 year.
1 year.
But I had to do that to find that out.
You had to step out there to try it.
I did.
To do it right.
I didn't know that I wasn't capable until I did it. I have talked to you before. I mean, this is common among people that are my age. My ability to articulate wasn't the same. My ability to retain information, to stand in front of the room, command. I couldn't do that anymore. I wasn't spontaneous as a thinker anymore. And the communication part of coaching was something that I worked hard at, and I thought I did it well. I couldn't do that anymore. Not up to my standard.
Right.
And not up to what the standard that those kids needed either.
What they need, because they don't necessarily know, because they're going to act and do as they're told for what you give them. But, it's admirable that you recognize and what your capacity is and that you stepped aside. That is very admirable, because a lot of people will just stay in it because we all know that thing called ego. It definitely enters in, and you're like, I'm going to do this. Yeah. Do or die.
It was a difficult realization to have about myself, but I transitioned through it. It's why I can talk about it now, and I'm okay talking about it. But that wasn't easy for me to accept at the time,
because it's again the journey versus the destination. Well, so it's that process that you went through.
The destination is never the focus.
Right.
It's an ending point to the journey, but the journey is everything, and how you work your way through it, the approach you take to doing it. If you're going to get to the outcome, it's because of the journey.
Correct. So, in closing, I want to ask you to just give me your first response. Okay. When I say to you, building lives, what does that mean to you?
I had multiple philosophical thoughts about dealing with kids and coaching. And one of the little phrases that I lived by was that we had to teach kids to manage things well that can't be changed. Because there are innumerable things in our lives that are going to happen that we can't change. We have to make best of those circumstances. And I'm related it to football because an official may make a bad call, but we can't change that. It may be raining cats and dogs with a 40-mile-an-hour wind, and we're still going to play. We can't change. So we have to manage that circumstance well in order to get the result we're looking for. Well, I'm looking at you, and I know you know that that's what life is. It's about managing our circumstances, whatever they happen to be, as well as we can so that we get a good outcome. So that's how I try to build lives, is to sell that message, to the kids who play.
So when I say sports network,
I think of like ESPN, but that's not the answer. No, a sports network is it's a connection to other people in the world of sports who for me, indicate by the way they do what they do that they love the game as much as I love the game, or they love what they're doing as much as I love what I was doing. Networking, that's what that meant to me.
Okay. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem. You're welcome.